My name is Scott Dishman. I'm the Executive Director of the BMW CCA Foundation. The very first thing we're going to do tonight is have a champagne toast to the Heroes of Bavaria. So if you have your champagne flute or whatever it is you're drinking, I'm going to hand this to Jackie Bichek, a trustee for the foundation.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to thank you all so much for coming. This has really been an amazing project. If you had seen this building years ago, it was an old pharmaceutical warehouse, and we have really, with Michael Mitchell and Andrea Gale and our staff, Scott Dishman, and our volunteers, yay volunteers, we have transformed this building into, this is our first museum exhibit of the BMW Car Club of America Foundation. So cheers to that, everybody. And I know that among this crowd, I know there are many of you who are very immersed in the BMW world, and I thank you all for coming, because I know for you this is like a birthday party. This is like awesome, right? But I want to thank also people who are not part of the BMW world, for whom this is their first experience. For those of you who are BMW virgins, I wanted to thank you for coming and for supporting us and seeing the work that we do. We are very proud of the work that we do at the foundation, and I think we should raise a toast to the Heroes of Bavaria, and thank you all so much for coming. It means the world to all of us. Thank you.
So let's have an informal poll here. Who is here for the first time tonight? Oh, good. I like that percentage. So I'm going to spend about 3 minutes just kind of getting you oriented to where you are, and then we're going to hand it over to the celebrity for the evening. So this is a 7-acre rectangle of land tucked up against the BMW Performance Center. It's dark, so you can't really tell, but if you looked out those windows in the daytime, you would see the track. This is going to be slowly developed by the foundation and the club as the new member campus. If you're a member of the BMW CCA, which of course is the best damn car club in the world, this will be, right? This will be your physical home, right? The club will be located here, the club itself. This museum and archive will be improved and expanded. There'll be workshops, clinics, festivals, concours. The owner's experience will be located here. As Jackie said, this is our first exhibition, Heroes of Bavaria, which opened in May of 2017. We had 400 people here on opening day. We've had thousands of people since. We've had people fly from Europe and be on the ground for 18 hours just to see these cars and get back in a plane and head back to the continent. The foundation does two things. This museum and archive is number one, and believe it or not, in this old pharmaceutical warehouse that Jackie mentioned, this is the world's second largest BMW museum and archive, the largest in the Americas. There's 45,000 plus BMW specific items in here, all collected by one crazy dude right over here in a jacket and tie. He's been at it for 17 years now, right? And has collected just an amazing collection of stuff, and he's done it for the pleasure of you. So I hope that you appreciate what Michael has done. The trustees have really made this happen, right? This land wasn't free, this building wasn't free, the 400-watt metal halide bulbs that are cooking us all, those aren't free. The trustees have been very generous, but we've had hundreds of donors step up and help to make this happen as well. So we're grateful to all of you. I know we have a lot of donors in the crowd here tonight. The other thing that we do besides the museum and archive, of course, is street survival. Yes. So, I think most of you probably know what street survival is, but it is a high-level car control program for teenage drivers. We teach what drivers ed and parents cannot teach. Had an amazing milestone this year with the 1,000th school of street survival being executed in October. Bill Wade, Tim Bichuk, Janie Bichuk, raise your hands. Everybody give these people a round of applause. They work their butts off to make it happen every year. Very, very grateful to them and to everyone who's made that program happen over time. So thank you very much for coming tonight. This is the last weekend, by the way, of Heroes of Bavaria. The next exhibition here, which will open in May, is going to be called The Icon, 50 Years of the 2002. It's going to be presented by The Workshop out of Libertyville, Illinois. And that exhibition is going to be the complete story of the 2002. It is going to be the how and the why, the personalities involved. It's going to be all of the stock variations, all of the period custom editions, the significant race cars, modified cars. It's going to be big, big fun. So we want you to come back and see that. So now, I'm going to hand it off to one Mr. Erik Wensberg. Come on up, Erik. Erik Wensberg, you have no idea how cool this is about to be. And if you don't know Erik, your world, the planet you walk on is about to become more entertaining and more fun. Erik was the first in-brand manager for BMW in the United States. He was a motorsport manager for BMW back in the championship days with PTG. He knows every wire and every screw in these cars and the story behind every wire and every screw. Highly entertaining guy. And he's going to take us on the ultimate pit walk through this collection. So over about the next 35, 40 minutes, listen carefully to this guy. You're going to hear a lot of stuff you've never heard before because no one else knows it. So take it away, Erik.
Thank you. I think no pressure, right? No pressure here. If it is true that I know every screw and nut and bolt and wire, it's because I paid for a lot of them along the way. The real results of my work are the crashed and broken stuff that's hanging from the walls, but that's another story. I came to BMW in the mid-'80s in a bit of a crisis situation. They were embarking on the largest racing program they had ever conceived of, and their longtime motorsport manager was gravely ill and unable to really function. So by the time I had about a month to think about it, I had grown up in racing. I had grown up in a racing family and done a lot of things in my youth, which I usually say, misspent youth is one way to put it. But at the end of the day, I had about 4 weeks to think about whether I wanted to get involved with this, and I never thought I would be in the car business. I was a sports marketing guy who happened to do business in racing. And at the end of the day, I thought a lot about what the BMW brand really represents and what the opportunities were in this country and around the world. And I was there only a month or two when I realized in shock that I knew more about cars than half the people in the building. And I thought, this is really scary. We're not talking about Oldsmobile here. We're talking about BMW. So I set out to make it my business to change that. And BMW had a reputation in the 70s and even the early 80s of getting involved in racing with great gusto and great flair and then losing their nerve a year or two later and pulling out. And people like Porsche and Ferrari and others would absolutely love that to be the case because they were sharpening their pencil each and every year, each and every race. And when you pull out, all your talented people go to the wind and they start working for somebody else. And you really have to build that whole database of technical talent and also driving talent to put a serious team together. So one of the things I vowed then and there was that I would change BMW's slightly schizophrenic approach to motorsports. You people think you know something about being an exotic game farm. Well, we've built one for you here right now that really talks about the history of this brand. And I used to describe motorsports to American BMW fans. This is the DNA of our brand. This is really the competitive history. And when you hear some of the things that I encountered when I got there, it was both shocking and exciting to really say, hey, this doesn't have to be this way. We can do a better job. We have the best car club of owners in the world. The largest chapter of BMW CCA out of 100 chapters around the world is in this country. So my first order of business was to take all the ropes down and put BMW CCA on our cars. This was for you, not for executives in Munich. So the story starts really right here. And this is Michael. Is Michael around? Okay. We want to open the engine lid here to show you this, but the 328 is really the landmark car for BMW pre-war. This is a very special one. This won an initial Grand Prix in Holland at Zandvoort, which became Holland's Grand Prix track. And at the end of the day, nothing could touch this car back in the day, built from 1936 to 1939. They built about 435 of them. Very, very rare. And this one not only had some serious racing history. You can come up, everybody come up and take a look. I want you to take a look at this engine. A very important trend-setting engine for a lot of reasons. People think about Chrysler when you talk about Hemis. You're looking at one of the first Hemi engines ever built right here in 1937. 3 downdraft carburetors, about 145 horsepower, but very reliable torque delivery. This was an M3 lightweight back in its day, and no one could touch it. And the true measure of that statement is that right through the war, this car was hidden in the storage shed of an art museum in Holland. And it made its way to the United States in the 60s, and it was raced for another 10 years in the SCCA by its American owner. These cars were pulled out after the war, and all the engineers at BMW said, hey, we don't have anything left. The company is in ruins. What do we have? And they had a parts bin filled with 328 stuff, and that's how they built the Veritases and other cars that kept them going right after the war. They built a total of 75 or 80 Veritases, all by hand, both race cars and road cars, and 90% of the bits were from this car that was already 20 or 30 years old. So this thing is amazing. It's obviously very valuable. This is presented by Lance White, who's here with us tonight, in patina, which means it is not restored. It is mechanically correct and fully operational, but purposely not restored because they're only original once. And you look around this car, it is really a landmark car in terms of its design and performance for BMW pre-war. If we can just go over here, I want to take you over here because this is truly, truly an amazing find. This is a prototype post-war. This is early 60s, and people might recognize the name Paul Rosche. I had the privilege of working with Paul Rosche, who was BMW's engine guru in Formula One and elsewhere for 35 years. Recently passed away about a year ago. But very, very brilliant engine designer and engineer. His predecessor was a guy named Alex von Falkenhausen, and he was a very elegant, white-haired guy. And he had a very attractive daughter, and there was an up-and-coming racing driver in Munich named Dieter Quester. And Quester made the excellent career move of marrying von Falkenhausen's daughter. So if you ever wonder how Dieter's career got off the ground. But what did BMW have? BMW, many times we talked about it. I was with the company nearly 15 years. And in many years, the motorcycle business was really, really modest. Very competitive, a lot going on there. And BMW said, we will never sell the motorcycle company because they saved us from bankruptcy 3 different times. And when I tell you that, you look at this car. This has a 700cc motorcycle engine in it. Hans Stuck's father got in this car, one of 2 ever built. The other is in a BMW museum. This is the only one in private hands. It lives in California, and it's been very generously loaned to us. Designed to climb hills. Now, when you do hill climbing, you don't worry too much about brakes. So this car has almost no brakes. But what it does have, you look at the influence of the other cars of the era, the Porsche 550 Spyder, other lightweight cars of the era, engine in the back, the car's going uphill, you want real traction to the rear wheels, 700cc motorcycle engine, souped up to within an inch of its life. Thank you, Dr. von Falkenheim. But there are only two that exist. I have no idea what it's worth, but this is, what you're looking at is a very exotic, very lightweight potato chip. And Hans Stuck's father earned his chops with BMW driving cars like this in hill climbs throughout the early 60s. And when you look at the Stuck family, they had a lot of history, both Hans and his father, in hill climbing. And this is a very, very rare piece. I have never seen it before, and it lives in the United States and is graciously loaned to us for this exhibit. You'll never see another one. Now, if we can walk right down this way, we're going to ignore the single-seaters for a moment. We're just going to walk that way. Let's start right here. The 2002s is where I'm going, but I'll start right here in the corner. One of our dear, dear friends and a longtime supporter of the BMW CCA Foundation, Don Detlefson, is here with us tonight. If he's shy, he's easily the tallest guy in the room. I don't know where he is, but this car is a 1965 BMW Tisa 1800, and it looks like a fairly mundane BMW New Classe sedan. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. They only built 200 of these cars, and they were absolutely the M3 lightweight of their era. It has been drilled out within an inch of its life to make it extremely light. The gas tank is twice the size of a normal car. Very high performance driveline, very high performance engine, and for some incredible reason, the most beautiful wooden Nardi steering wheel I've ever seen. I don't know where that came from, but the steering wheel arguably is worth more than the whole car. I'm not sure where that came from, but at the end of the day, Don had this as his personal car, and he restored it absolutely beautifully. This car came in two colors, white and gray. You had to have an FIA racing license in order to qualify to even buy one. And they only made 200, roll bar in the back, beautiful bucket seats. Many, many people, including Dieter Quester and a lot of the German drivers of the era, started their careers in this very car. Let me just take you next door to this one. Scott and Fran Hughes, also very key members of the BMW CCA Foundation, loaned us this car. This is a very famous private race car in the early 70s, the Miller and Norburn IMSA championship car. BMW NA was not formed in this country as a standalone subsidiary until 1975. That was when a lot of things changed. We came over and brought a serious team and blah, blah, blah. This car raced in 72, 73, and 74, and not only was it a terrific team, they won the first major championship in IMSA, the BF Goodrich Championship, in this car with Nick Craw driving. And if that name is familiar to you, Nick went on to, he was a former head of the Peace Corps around the world, a very worldly guy, very interesting guy, terrific driver. And he is now the number 2 guy in Formula One in the FIA behind Mr. Ecclestone. So I'm not sure what that means, but at the end of the day, Nick is a dear friend of BMW. He had 3 fantastic seasons in this car, and the reason it's very important is that it really bridges the gap between the early 70s and the mid-70s when BMW came in with a vengeance, trying to show people as a company it was not about British Motor Works. So let's go to the next one. We have this car here for a couple of reasons, but one of them is this is a very typical BMW CCA club racer. This is a 2002 that started out as a road car, been modified through the years, as you can plainly see. Make it very light, make it strong. Some would say a little frightening. But at the end of the day, very capable, very well-balanced car. And the engine in this car is something truly special. It's a Originally a Schnitzer Formula 2 engine, very high compression, some very exotic pieces on it, including the induction system. So at the end of the day, this is a budget race car that is very, very well balanced and amazingly quick. And guys like Ray Corman would race these cars to great effect, not only in Europe, but in the United States, and they are still doing it 30 and 40 years later. If we can push down one more. This car is a treat. This is a car you have never seen before. I had never seen it before about a month ago. As it turns out, I had seen it in 1992. We orchestrated a 20th anniversary celebration for BMW Motorsport at Sebring and Moroso with a good friend of ours, Richard Conway, who was here today. This car is one of the very first CSLs ever made. And if you know the backstory on the CSL, Motorsport did not exist. The marketing and product development at the time was run by a guy named Bob Lutz, Swiss-born American guy, very, very interesting and successful car executive, as I'm sure many of you know. Very involved in Detroit for the last 30 years. His notion was put some aluminum panels on this car, let's lighten it up, and let's see what it can do as a race car. This car was built before motorsport even existed, and it is thought to be the only rally car ever made, and it actually won a very famous rally in 1972 with none other than Finnish rally driver Rauno Aaltonen, who I had the pleasure of working with in the early days of BMW advanced driver training. He was the guy that got BMW in the advanced driver training business. And as you may know, you're yards away from the circuit that does it here in the United States full time now. Aaltonen was a fantastic character, all of 5 feet tall, but he was an absolute animal behind the wheel and very entertaining to talk to. This car was lost. It had not been seen in 40 years, and we now realize a fellow in Philadelphia had it. We don't know how he had it. It was all painted orange. It showed up at our 20th anniversary event in 1992 in the parking lot, and no one knew quite what it was. We couldn't figure it out, but there were telltale things all around it that led us to believe this car is indeed something special. Now, another one of our board members, a fantastic collector from the West Coast, Peter Gleason, found this car and went to great lengths shipping it to England and had it returned exactly to as it raced in 1972. This is a real museum piece. You will never see this car again other than Peter Gleason's collection, and we are frankly delighted to have it here because now you have the complete lineage of the CSL story right here within 20 feet. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never been able to show people the different variations of this car, so why don't we go take a look? This is a very important car. I'm going to blast myself here. This is a Group 2 CSL, a very famous one indeed. Scott and Fran Hughes generously loaned this car to us. It's a car that's come in and out of my life several times. It is an important car for about 5 reasons. It had a long IMSA career. It had a long European career. In 1973, it won the European Touring Car Championship with Dieter Quester and a couple of other Tony Heisemans driving. It also won its class at Le Mans in 1973. And when this car was found in the United States, in fact, it had been heavily modified to race in IMSA, as you see next door here with the fat fenders and so forth. Richard Conway went to BMW in Munich and said, "You have the only other Group 2 CSL known to still exist." And they let him copy the fenders line for line. He made clay copies and had the fenders rebuilt, and now the car is beautifully restored as it raced Le Mans in 1973. This is a beautiful car, a very valuable car and a car that's still active. Scott is quite active with this car in vintage racing today, and we are thrilled to have it here.
Eric, can I take 30 seconds?
Sure.
Scott, would you come up here?
A short commercial break. Hold on.
Well, I found this in a bunch of old photographs that I had taken when I went to Le Mans in 1973. And it's a picture of this car at Le Mans, and it's the original, and I would like Scott to have it for his collection.
Oh, thank you, Scott. It looks like it's going a little faster than when I drove it at Le Mans.
So as you can see, the story unfolds as we speak. That's terrific, and that's exactly how it happens. It's really kind of fun to people come up to you and say, I saw this car when? And one of the reasons I'm as passionate about these cars as I am is I had been with the company 2 or 3 months when I was told, oh, there's an old warehouse up in Connecticut with a bunch of crap that we're storing. We want to clean it out. Why don't you go up there and take a look at what's there? So I said, sure. I was working to establish the Skip Barber driving school. We were working on some other projects. I drive up to Connecticut and we kick open the door of this old dirt floor warehouse with one bulb hanging in the middle of it. And I peer in and I can't believe what I'm seeing. Here is David Hobbs's 320 Turbo sitting on the ground with no wheels. Here is the March M1C up on its side with boxes all over it. Everything is covered in an inch of dust. 2 M1s, a whole bunch of parts and boxes. And they said, don't worry about this. We're going to give it all to a boys' industrial school so they can learn how to drill and cut. And I said, the hell they are. I said, lock this door and nobody gets in here unless I say so. And I got in my car and I went back to New Jersey and I walked right into our VP of Marketing's office. And I said, Hans, you can't believe it. They've got the DNA of our whole company up there in the warehouse and it's rotting away and they want to cut it up and throw it away. So he said, you're right. We got to do something. The problem is we have no money. So as most of my BMW colleagues can attest, that is a typical refrain. So for the next 2 or 3 years, we would sit there talking about new car introductions and dealer meetings and whatever excuse we could come up with. And he would look at me and say, I think we need a vintage car for this project. So we would carve off a little money and one by one, we restored them all. And now our collection of 5 or 6 cars has become a collection of 20 or 30 cars of every type we have ever raced in North America. And I'm pretty proud of it. Now, when you talk about real race cars are technically designed to go into battle, and they do not really expect, even the people who build them, they do not really expect to survive their careers. And one of the reasons these cars are worth a lot of money is that most of them did not survive their careers. I talk a lot about the PTG era. We won Daytona. It was a very big win for us. That car is sitting at the bottom of a landfill right now in Winchester, Virginia. Was crashed a year later and could not be saved. This is typical. And what you're looking at right here, which was taken care of by none other than Crew Chief of the Year in IMSA 1973, Mr. Jack Darren, sitting right here, took care of this car. And there he is, ladies and gentlemen. Jack Darren, a dear friend to the entire BMW racing community. This car came over as one of the factory-built CSLs in 1975. It was originally set aside as a spare car, but they immediately crashed one and put this into service. And it is modified in what you would call Group 4 trim here. But Peter Gregg and none other than our guest tomorrow evening, Brian Redman, and John Fitzpatrick, an Englishman, drove this car in 1976 to win the 24 Hours of Daytona outright. It had never been done before. Everybody thought BMW, no way they can beat Porsche, to say nothing of Lola and Ferrari and a few others. This is arguably the most famous vintage BMW in the United States. And it is owned by Kevin Ladd, who's with us here this evening. Kevin, thank you for loaning us your beautiful car. It's a very special piece, and if we got in it right now, it would fire and it would scare the hell out of all of you. Let's go down one further. This is perhaps the ultimate development of the CSL project that lasted, let's call it 3 to 4 years. And we took the hood off of this one because it's got a very special engine. This is called the Group 5 version of the CSL. You can see the fenders are a little wider, spoiler is a little deeper, and the rear wing is more pronounced. And if you look at the 320 next to it, it has the same rear wing. BMW is pretty good at parts bin engineering. But having said that, all these mirrors, you see different things that come out of the air dams here. These are all out of the parts bin. But this car is not a factory car. It's part of the Lance White collection. Very, very significant car for a couple of reasons. One is it's been beautifully restored and it has not been run much, so it presents very, very nicely. The M49 engine is as exotic as this engine ever got. And as you can see, it sits upright in the chassis itself. There were a number of reasons to do that. Slide valve fuel injection here, big time exhaust headers there. This produced, let's call it 475, probably more like 500 horsepower. And as you will hear tomorrow night, that wasn't enough. They went ahead and turbocharged this engine. And the reason we don't have one to show you tonight is that most of them did not survive their career. But we have some humorous stories about the valiant efforts, let's call it. But this is a very solid car. It was built by a German dealer named Bepp Meyer. And Meyer had a lot of friends in Munich, and he had a lot of friends at BMW Motorsport, and they built this car for him as a privateer car, raced all over Europe with some famous drivers, came to the U.S. in the hands of an old friend we know from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Alf Gebhardt, which many of you know. Alf has had his hands on a lot of cars through the years, and he ran it in IMSA for 2 or 3 years at Daytona and Sebring. You see the air exhaust, the outlets in the back. This is all to relieve pressure. Everything about this car is aerodynamically as good as they could make it. And it's a beautiful example of, let's call it the pinnacle of the CSL development of this period. Let's go next door. The 320 Turbo. This car belongs to BMW of North America. This is one of the babies I saved. I found it sitting on its chassis with no wheels. David Hobbs will tell you tomorrow night that this, in fact, was his most favorite BMW ever. They built 3 of these cars. They all still exist. The first one came over and tried to run as a normally aspirated car in IMSA, producing about 350 horsepower. At that time, 1977, Porsche is running the single-turbo 934, and they just kicked our ass. So they quickly said, okay, this isn't going to do it, and in steps Paul Rosche. We have an idea. We have very solid 4-cylinder engine technology that we've been working on in Formula 2 for years. We have a Formula 2 over here, which I will show you in a minute. Let's take the bulletproof M12 engine and let's turbocharge it. I have a reason I want to do this. So here we go, McLaren engines in Livonia, Michigan, working on a test program. No one even knew what it was really for. But you know what it was really for, because a few years later, it won the Formula One World Championship at a time when Renault had been playing with turbocharged cars for 4 years. We came in and did it in a year and a half. This car is the second car in the series. Very, very well balanced. You can see they used to call it the flying brick. I mean, they lovingly called it the flying brick. But it had 3, if not 4, I think 5 wins total before they built the third car that they called the lightweight, which was a little more developed than this one. We found this and kept it, and it is a remarkable piece of engineering because 4 or 5 IMSA wins all came at the expense of the twin-turbo 935 that had about twice the grunt. So you're talking about excellent engineering, you're talking about excellent driving, and you're talking about a car that can really go the distance. It's called heart. It is not even a design. This car had guts, and it would mix it up with the best of them. And when it went well, nobody could touch it. Look at the wheelbase. It looks like a Lancia Stratos. You better be prepared when you get behind the wheel of this thing because it had a spool in the rear end, completely locked differential, 19-inch rear wheels, and it would go like stink. And David may tell you, depends on how many beers we feed him tomorrow, you go around the banking at Daytona, and as you're on the banking, it's as if you're in a salad bowl. We would have to take the decal right off because you're looking essentially through the roof to try to see where you're going. All you can see is road. Very quickly, they started cutting holes in the roof of the prototypes and even these cars so the drivers could see forward on the banking. It is that extreme. And by the way, you're going 195 with your best friends all around you. That's one thing during the day under beautiful conditions. You try it at night after you've been running 10, 12 hours. That's what really separates the men from the boys. And in the rain. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. We're going to move right along. I'm going to take you down this way. I want to just touch base quickly because Ray Corman is here and a very special car in his career. This is the E30 M3. You guys all recognize it. This actually was the first M3 we ever brought into the U.S. It's a pre-production car, serial number 1. We ran 1 and 2. We shortened them by a couple of feet several times. But having said that, the car was incredibly successful in IMSA Firehawk competition against dramatically more competitive cars. Mustangs, Firebirds, Porsches, a lot of cars that could really outmuscle this car. We had Davy Jones, we had Ron Christensen, we had John Andretti and Ray Corman driving for us, and we outdrove them. And a good example is they would chase us through turn 1 at Watkins Glen, and we would go ripping into the corner and hardly brake. And they would get so pissed off, they would rip past us down the straightaway, and then we'd do it 4 or 5 times, and they'd lose their brakes and they'd go right off. So we could absolutely bait them. This car finished first and second in September 1987 at the 6 hour at Watkins Glen. Never happened in the history of the series. One car finished first and second. Ray Corman is here with us tonight. Mr. Ray Corman, ladies and gentlemen. I want to take you to the next one. Tom Milner is going to be here later on tonight. This is one of the very early E36 PTGs. I was involved with this car as well. We have a lot of stories we can tell about it, but the reality of it was we thought the E36 was the car to get back into racing. We raced these cars very, very successfully, 6 or 8 championships, a team-wide percentage, 45% wins of all the races we entered. Won Daytona twice, won Sebring twice. Very special car, very well balanced and very, very tough. Also part of the Scott and Fran Hughes collection. David Donahue, Pete Halsmer, John Paul Jr., a lot of famous drivers. The car behind you here is the next generation, and this is actually an insider's story only. BMW was running out of horsepower. The series was running away from us. We did not have a V8 that was available to us that would be legal. Tom Milner, in his wisdom, said, that's no problem. I can take an M5 engine and put it right in there, and we can do it in 10 minutes. So what you see here is a home-built. PTG built 2 of these cars. They actually ran very well in IMSA competition for several years, not a sanctioned BMW project. We continue. This is the later edition of the M3. This is the E92, a very sophisticated car. Now we are talking about Ray Hall Letterman, and now we are in the era of plug and play. Back at PTG, we were in the motors, we were in the brakes, we were in the chassis, we were rebuilding things up to our elbows, and then some. If the motor takes a dump in this car, pull it out and put in a new one. This was a whole different form of racing, very, very competitive, racing against factory-built race cars from Chevy, Ferrari, Aston Martin, some of the best in the world. And this car absolutely kicked ass and took names, won 3 or 4 championships. Let's just go over here because we don't want to run late. This was the car that, rightly or wrongly, this was the car that brought me to BMW. This is the 1986 GTP car. It was built by March. We had a car that we tested a great deal in 1985. They built 4 or 5 of them for us. Was never fully developed. It was incredibly fast. It had a stroked Formula One engine in it, 2.1 liters. And take your guess as to the horsepower, but it was easily 900 and could have been as high as 1,200 in qualifying. I used to joke we could leak water in this thing and it would catch fire. There was so much heat back there, you just wouldn't believe it. The turbocharger is the size of a pumpkin. And after a lap and a half, it would come in for a nut and bolt check, and I would look in the back, and you could see right through the casing and look at the innards. It was just glowing red. That is not a great thing for a race car. But I'll tell you a couple of funny stories. We won a race. We led 4 or 5. We should have won 4 or 5. Al Holbert was an old friend of mine, and he was racing against us in the Lowenbrow Special 962. He said, Erik, if you come back next year, we can't touch you. We can't touch the speed of this car. You get it sorted out, the championship is yours. We said, hell yes. The board said, hell no, and the budget went away. So that was the end of that. Let me just talk to you about this car, because this is actually a very special car. It was cut in half when I found it. This is 1981 March, the first ever ground effects prototype ever built. BMW had a great idea. David Hobbs drove the car. Mark Schurer drove the car. Never really got the development that it needed. In the end, for half the races, we ran M1s because we couldn't get this car ready. We ran it with the 6-cylinder M1 engine in it. Didn't turn out to be enough, so we went to the turbocharged 4, and that was enough. It would go fast enough, but the season wasn't long enough for us to get our development done. So at the end of the day, this car is a story about what could have been rather than what truly was. Very interesting car. We put it back together and drove it in our 1992 motorsport celebration. I was sitting right in that little chair right there when Mark Schurer blew the motor. And I said, okay, Mark, you just drove the last lap this car will ever drive in anger. And I was telling somebody today, there's a 320 grill right here that came off my wife's car. I know because I dented it right there, and it's been there for 35 years. And my wife is here this evening, and there she is. Okay, go to this Z3. This is a very interesting thing. You will never see this car again. This car is here to show you how this process works. This is an aerodynamic model, a pre-production car that was built up as if it was a race car to conform to the rules of the day. This is late 90s, early 2000s. The reality is the spoiler could not be above the highest point on the roofline. So you have various things about how wide it can be, how high it can be. We could never make this car work. The aerodynamics of the car never worked. It danced around in the rear. The shape here makes a complete vacuum. The wing is doing very little for you. We could never make the car work aerodynamically. It was a great idea. It would have been a great chassis to race. But within the rules of the day, it just didn't work. This car went nowhere, and you will never see it again. Let's talk for a minute about this car. This is a very unusual car that was brought out as called a compromise choice by BMW when the rules in sports car racing were changing. It went from sports car, it went to IMSA, it went back and forth. They recognized very clearly they needed big power and they needed aerodynamic efficiencies. And look at the sculpting of this car aerodynamically. It's absolutely incredible. This car should not be a successful race car. And a tremendous amount of work went into making this thing absolutely move through the air, high downforce, very efficient, and they raced it for almost 3 years. Didn't win the championship, but it was a very competitive car when the rules were changing by the week. Very, very difficult period. And it's an important part of our history because it kept us there, whereas in normal times, BMW would have pulled out. I want to just, we're on the home stretch here now. This is David Donahue's M5 supercar. This car was run by a private group in Pennsylvania called Ed Arnold Racing. Mr. Arnold was a computer entrepreneur with a lot of money, and he loved racing, and he thought that this would be a great thing for him. And he had Hans Stuck and a bunch of famous drivers running it against Lotus and Nissan, Porsche, a lot of road-going 300ZX Nissan, road-going performance cars. And here we have, let's face it, an elegant taxi. So Munich called us and said, listen, this guy's spending a ton of money, and they're finishing 9th and 10th. You got to get involved in this car. Go meet him. Go see what you can do. So we had a meeting. I talked about some engineering that we could bring to the car. I talked about some focus that we could bring to the team. He let us take it over and help him reorganize it. And what we found, I fear, was all too typical in amateur racing when people think they want to be a professional and they want to go out and do it. I used to joke to people, I got a call once a week for 15 years saying, Erik, I want to be a race car driver. I can do it. I dreamt about it last night and it went great. You give me the money and I'll show you how to do it. We took this program. David Donahue was a terrific young man, still is, a good friend of ours, son of Mark Donahue, arguably the most accomplished American racer ever. And we really focused. This guy was throwing money out the back of his truck faster than he could blow it. It was thousands and thousands of dollars being lit on fire and thrown on the ground. So we stopped all of that and really focused on the chassis and the engine and rebuilding the car around David. We won 6 races. We won the championship. We went back and for good measure did it again the second year with a different driver. This car sat in storage, and my colleague Larry Koch, who's with us tonight, was successful in bringing this car. Larry, there he is. Larry Koch, ladies and gentlemen, was responsible for getting this car out of dingy storage and getting it restored. They kept engine development going that hadn't been touched in 20 years from the M1 in this car. Really an incredibly capable car. Now, I do want to get to the piece de resistance, and that is these two. These two cars are really, really incredible, and I consider them both dear, dear friends. I'll start with this one. I've driven this car more than I will admit to anybody in the room that works for BMW. But I had a passing involvement in this program. The deal was McLaren went to Le Mans in 1995 with no expectation that they could win the race. They enter 4 or 5 cars, and to their shock, it rains 21 hours out of 24, and there's a guy from Finland named J.J. Leito who is certifiably insane, who drove his heart out, and they win. So BMW comes home and says, Jesus, we did the engine, we did all the engineering, we got nothing here. McLaren got all the positive press. So they said, we have to go back as a factory program. We're going to do this right next year. Slight problem. We don't have the money. So they said, North America, you help us enter a car. We'll give you a driver that you can pick. We chose Danny Sullivan. And England was going to do one, and France was going to do one. They couldn't come up with the money, so they did one together. We go back in 1996 to race Le Mans. It was a dream of mine. A good friend of mine, ex-BMW colleague, Phil Capicella, who's with us tonight, went with us on that trip. Phil, where are you? There he is. Fantastic trip. We ran as high as third. Car finished 8th and did a credible job, but frankly, the Porsches were the class of the field. But here's the deal. We paid $1 million for this car. We had the opportunity to sell a sponsorship to Planet Hollywood. They did us the favor of not paying the bill. They had a great time on the trip. They didn't pay the bill. The deal was you pay the sponsorship and you get to keep the car. And I went to our president, Vic Doolin, and I said, how can we not do that deal? This car's worth about $2.5 million. And he said, you're right. We have to do the deal. Let's do it. So I said, okay. We go over and run the car. They clean it all up, leave all the Le Mans decals are all still on it, and we bring it home. And the first thing he says to me is, Erik, get rid of it. Sell it. And I'm like, I don't know. I think it's an old race car. It's yesterday's news. No one wants this thing. I mean, it's really a piece of crap. And he said, I don't care, sell it. He walks down the hallway. And I had no intention of selling it. So I did absolutely nothing. And 6 months later, he comes up to me in the hallway and he says, Erik, how's it going selling the McLaren? And I said, well, I honestly, there's not much interest in this thing. It's an old race car. Nobody wants it. And it's pretty expensive, too. We've gotten a few offers, but it's really nothing worth sharing. And he said, you're not going to sell it, are you? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, I knew it. He said, I told the board he wasn't going to sell it. And he said, he's walking away. He says, doesn't matter. They wrote it off anyway. Who cares? And I thought, hey, I didn't get fired, so it's a good. But the moral of the story is that they only built 100 of them. 20 or 30 were race cars. Only 6 or 8 were factory-run race cars. And a excellent condition road car sold last summer for $16 million. So let's call this worth around 20. And that is my gift to you and to everybody at BMW of North America, because I didn't even ask for 10%. Now, this car is a very, very serious piece. And the thing that you need to understand about this car is that it was built to go back to Le Mans. This is pre-Audi dominance. We actually had Christensen racing for us. Interesting point. But the reality of it is we had a car that we built with Williams a year earlier that was phenomenally unsuccessful. It was really not well done at all. And when you look at this car, I want you to look at one thing. Michelin tires. This car was built around Michelin tires. And one of our dear supporters for the Street Survival program, Johnny Valencia from Michelin, is here with us tonight. Johnny, take a bow. Thank you. I call this car one of the most awesome pieces I have ever seen. Same driveline and mechanicals as this car, arguably 600 horsepower, but look at the aerodynamics here. They came up with an idea that was so clever, that was within the rules, is that the roll cage used to go all the way across the cockpit. And they thought, why? Take all of that off, put it over the driver, and look at the aerodynamic savings. And when you talk to Bill Oberlin and other guys that drove this car, they only built 5 of them. They all still exist. This is a car that you wear. It is not a car that you get into. And it is an oh my God moment. this thing is a real weapon. It comes out in the spring of 1999, and they go to Sebring and kick everyone's ass. And they won the 12 Hours of Sebring outright with this very car. They also went to Le Mans later that year, won Le Mans outright, the only time BMW has ever done it, and they did it with this car. I tried very, very hard to buy one of these cars for a wealthy American collector about 5 years ago, and I was, I was told, Mr. Wensberg, the answer is no. Hell no. Not just no, hell no. So they will not let these cars go, but it is, to me, one of the most beautiful weapons I have ever seen as a race car. Its competitive life was only 2 or 3 years. And Bill Auberlen, if you catch him, he will tell you this is the car that he flipped at the Petit Le Mans in 2000, and it was a very scary moment. He comes right up over the hill, and a Ferrari jumps in front of him very unexpectedly and cuts the air off the front of the car. And he said it grabbed his helmet. He knew he was in trouble because the vacuum grabbed his helmet forward, and the next thing you know, he's looking at sky. And he said it got very, very quiet. And he said all I could think of to do was try to get small and just say, this is going to really hurt. And he was very fortunate. You can Google it, Bill Auberlen 2000 Petit Le Mans. He landed on his wheels, which was almost impossibly lucky, but it kicked the shit out of him. And he won't admit it on television, but he told me it was brutal. He probably had a concussion. He got out of the car and fell down by the guardrail. And all he thought was, I can't believe I have all my limbs. This is a very, very potent car, and we are thrilled that BMW let us borrow these 2 cars because between the 2 of them, they're probably worth more than the rest of the collection combined. But what I wanted to really convey to you folks is that this is really not about mechanical devices. It's about the competitive DNA of this brand and what this brand set out to do, whether it's with art cars or with racing. It is very, very competitive. The cars are designed from the word go to speak to the driver and to arm the driver with all kinds of technologies that aid in the driving experience. And when I used to be interviewed right at the trackside, they would say, why are you doing this? And I said, we think our cars are that good. That's why we're doing it. And it's notable, at that time, I used to call out the Japanese all the time. Where are they? They're working on their stereos. We're working on our suspension and our driveline. And privately, I would say, where are you going to go in Japan? You can't get out of third gear. There's nowhere to drive. The Autobahn really shaped this company. And at the end of the day, what you see here is the competitive spirit and the DNA wrapped up all into one mechanical device that conforms to the rules in one era or another. And I'll give you one final example, and Scott Dishman is giving me the choke sign. I just want to show you the Formula One car because it's a very significant piece. This is the car that brought BMW back to Formula One. And I want you to just look at what you see here. The year is 2000. We had the dubious distinction of having Ralf Schumacher drive for us, arguably one of the biggest assholes in Formula One. But having said that, look at these pieces. All of the suspension, push rods and pull rods, everything is aerodynamically sculpted. You're talking about millions of dollars spent in the wind tunnel for every piece on this car. Look at the flow. Look at how abbreviated everything is, yet it is bulletproof, safe, and strong. And the engine is a beautiful, normally aspirated V10. Wait for it, 17,500 RPM. You explain that one to me. I mean, this thing is a weapon beyond weapons. And the thing that is astounding is after 12 months, it was yesterday's news and it was thrown aside. Let's develop the new one. That's why you see the money that is being spent in Formula One today. I'm not sure it's a good thing. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it's a bad thing. When you have to spend 2, 3, arguably $400 million a year. What are we doing here? I'm not sure. But as a mechanical piece, this thing is astounding, and the amount of work that went into come on in, come take a good look at it. The gearbox is aerodynamically correct. I mean, you tell me if you've ever seen a car as beautifully constructed as this one. And it never won. This car never won. It finished on the podium 4 or 5 times, seconds and thirds and fifths. Jenson Button was the other teammate who went on to win the championship. Ralf Schumacher's perfectly capable driver. If he had a personality, he probably would still have a career. But at the end of the day, this is a beautiful car, and we're deeply in debt for BMW of North America for loaning it to us for this exhibition. What you see next door is a training car, BMW Formula Junior for young drivers. People like Nico Rosberg and Graham Rahal earned their chops in these cars, racing in a field that were all driven by motorcycle engines. And down below, the March Formula 2 car, which is where Paul Rocha really established his reputation as a master engine builder, and they dominated Formula 2 in the 80s, winning the championship something like 9 out of 10 years. We've gone way over, and I apologize for that, but we have a really fun program tomorrow night. You're going to hear it from the people who really drove these cars, not from someone who stood there changing a tire. So I want to thank you for your attention, and thank you for coming.
Big applause for Erik Wensberg. The singular, the stellar Erik Wensberg. Erik is an advisor to our board of trustees. He's a great asset to the foundation. He's a great asset in the chase for resources for street survival, and we are very grateful to have him around.